All right, let's get right into it. We're going to unpack one of the most powerful ideas in the entire Indian Constitution, the right to equality. Now, this isn't just some single, simple rule. We're talking about Articles 14 through 18, which together form a whole toolkit designed to build a truly fair and just society. It's really the cornerstone of all our fundamental rights. But, that brings up a really interesting question, doesn't it? Is real equality just about treating every single person the exact same way, no matter what? Well, as we're about to find out, the Constitution has a much more sophisticated and, frankly, a much more powerful answer to that question. To really get the power of this toolkit, you have to rewind a bit. Think about the framers of the Constitution. They weren't just writing laws on a blank sheet of paper. No, they were crafting a deep, profound promise to a brand new nation, a promise that was born out of a very, very difficult past. And they were staring down a huge problem, a society that was just built on layers and layers of inequality. I mean, from discrimination based on caste, religion, and gender, to the totally unchecked power of rulers. These were the harsh realities they were determined to change. So you see, these articles weren't just laws. They were a revolutionary strike against that old system.
So what's the foundation for this whole thing? It all starts with Article 14. You can think of it as the master rule, the central engine from which everything else gets its power.
And this master rule makes a two-part promise to every single person within India. It guarantees equality before the law and equal protection of the laws. Now, I know what you're thinking. Those sound kind of the same, right? But they're actually two very distinct ideas that work together in a brilliant way. And here's how they balance each other out. Equality before the law, that's what we call a negative concept. It basically says, stop. No one gets special treatment. No one is above the law. It prevents privilege. But then you have the other side, equal protection of the laws, which is a positive command. It tells the state, go and do this. Make sure that people in similar situations are treated in a similar way. So one stops privilege and the other demands fairness. It's a perfect combo. And this is the key takeaway here. Article 14 doesn't mean you have to treat everyone identically. It just forbids treating them unfairly. So how do we know the difference? Well, the courts came up with a test for what's called permissible classification. Think of it like this. A doctor doesn't give every patient the same medicine, right? You give different medicines for different illnesses, but the goal is always the same, to make them healthy. A law can do the same thing. It can create groups as long as there's a clear, sensible reason for the grouping, that's the intelligible differentia, and as long as that grouping is logically connected to what the law is trying to achieve, that's the rational nexus. Okay, so we've got our master rule. Now let's look at the more specific tools in the kit. Articles 15 and 16. Take that big idea from Article 14 and apply it to some really important parts of our social lives.
Article 15 gets super specific. It says the state can't discriminate against you only because of your religion, race, sex, and so on, especially when it comes to things like accessing shops, hotels, or wells. But, and this is so important, it also allows the state to make special rules to help groups that have been held back, like women, children, and socially backward classes. This is sometimes called protective discrimination, and the goal is to achieve real, meaningful equality, not just equality on paper.
Then Article 16 takes that same logic and applies it directly to government jobs. It says, look, there has to be equal opportunity for everyone in public employment, but, and again, this is crucial, it also allows for reservations for underrepresented backward classes to make sure they actually get a fair shot at those opportunities. But the toolkit doesn't stop there. It gets even more powerful. The last two articles, 17 and 18, aren't just about preventing discrimination in the future. They are designed to be active, powerful tools to literally erase the injustices of the past. And Article 17 is about as direct as it gets. It is absolute. It completely abolishes the practice of untouchability. Full stop. And it makes practicing it in any form a crime that you can be punished for. This isn't a suggestion. It's a non-negotiable command for social reform. And then you have Article 18, which gets rid of titles. By saying the state can't just hand out titles like Raja or Nawab, the Constitution is trying to build a society where your status comes from what you do and what you achieve, not from some artificial rank you inherited or were given. So let's just quickly put that all together. You see how it works? It's a system. You start with the big, general promise of equality in Article 14. Then you get specific rules against discrimination in Articles 15 and 16. And finally, you have these powerful tools for direct social reform and for removing artificial status in Articles 17 and 18. It all fits together. But theory is one thing. How does all of this actually hold up when it's put to the test in the real world? Well, let's see how these principles have been thrashed out in court.
So, our first case is about a textile mill, the Sholapur Spinning and Weaving Company. Now, this company was being so badly mismanaged that it was about to collapse. So the government stepped in and passed a special law to take over just this one single company.
Right away, this raised a massive question for the Supreme Court. Can you do that? Can you make a law that targets just one company? I mean, isn't that the very definition of unfair and unequal treatment?
The court's answer was really fascinating. Justice Mukherjee pointed out that this wasn't just some random company. It was making something essential for the community. And if it shut down, tons of people would lose their jobs. It had, as he put it, a unique social character. And so, the verdict was in. The law was valid. The court basically said that because of its unique importance to the public, the company could be treated as a class by itself. This established a huge legal idea. Yes, a single person or a single company can be its own category if the circumstances are extraordinary enough.
Okay, but now let's flip the coin and look at a very different case. This time, the government passed a law to settle a long, messy, and totally private inheritance fight between two parties. The law basically just picked a winner.
So this brings up the next logical question, right? What happens when the state jumps into a purely private fight? What if there's no essential commodity at stake, no risk of mass unemployment, no public interest at all? And on this, the court drew a very firm line in the sand. The law was struck down. It was declared unconstitutional. The court's reasoning was clear. Just because a private dispute is complicated or has been going on for a long time, that is not a good enough reason to take away someone's fundamental right to have their case decided fairly by a court. Okay, so we've looked at the rules and we've seen them in action. Let's zoom out one last time and just talk about the big picture, why this right is so incredibly important for all of us today. So, what's the key takeaway here? First, the right to equality is not about sameness, it's about fairness. Second, it's okay to treat people differently, but only if there's a good reason and a legitimate goal. Third, and this is maybe the most important part, this right is our shield. It protects us from the random, arbitrary actions of the state. And finally, remember this isn't some dusty rule from the past. It's a living, breathing principle that our courts are still defining and applying to new challenges all the time. And that leaves us with one last big thought. The Constitution gives us this incredible, powerful promise of equality. But making sure that promise is a reality for every single person in this country, well, that's the ongoing work that falls to all of us.